Hello and welcome once again to a video that takes a look at the weapons of Fallout. This will be a two-parter based on the laser weapons of the Fallout series. Like most of my other breakdown videos, I'm going to introduce and give a description of the weapon and how it functions in the game. I will try and identify the inspiration behind the weapon's design, while also presenting some interesting lore and any cool random information related to the weapon. I also like to give some conjecture if there is no solid lore or explanations, and even relate some of the things we talk about to real-life examples. We have a good number of interesting laser weapons to get through, so let's start with the Watts 1000 laser pistol. The Watts 1000 is first introduced in Fallout and features in Fallout 2 and Fallout Tactics. It vaguely resembles a firearm, as opposed to some futuristic or sci-fi ray gun. The design resembles the blocky slide design of many pistols, like the Heckler & Kochs and the Glocks, with the barrel protruding in a fashion that reminds me of a Beretta. An interesting feature is that instead of a normal-sized trigger guard, it instead has a hand guard that is the entire length of the grip. This is an unusual design, particularly for pistols, and is most common in bullpup designs, like the Steyr, AUG, and the FAMAS rifles. The only benefit that this type of guard offers over a conventional trigger guard is that it is easier to get on the trigger and fire while wearing gloves. It also has some strange looking components, like the dial-like circle on the side, what appear to be lights, and therefore may be power or heat indicators, and what almost appears to be a front grip. The ridges on this front grip may be there to increase friction, or perhaps it isn't a grip at all, and the ridges are meant to give increased surface area so that the gun will cool more quickly. It is difficult to draw any conclusions without seeing a higher resolution image, or how the gun would be operated or reloaded up close in the game. This pistol can be upgraded in Fallout 2 to become the Magneto Laser Pistol, and can be seen with some additions. According to Fallout 2, the upgrade is said to be, and I quote, a magnetic field targeting system that tightens the laser emission, end quote, which gives the gun extra penetrating power, making it more viable in the mid-game. Now, describing the upgrade as a magnetic targeting system that tightens laser emission doesn't really make much sense to me, but there are definitely weirder things in the Fallout universe, so I won't let this keep me up at night. The Watts 2000 laser rifle is also referred to as the Sunbeam laser rifle in Tactics, and is found in Fallout 2 and Tactics. It has a long range and increased power over the laser pistol. Looking at the design, the barrel is definitely inspired by the PPSH-41, which was a World War II era Russian submachine gun. You can tell by the small windows, and how the one closest to the muzzle is circular instead of elongated, just like on the PPSH. It has an extended foregrip, more akin to a long rifle, and no large drum magazine. One thing to note is that two large cables go from the gun to what looks like a scope on the top. Perhaps these cables power an electronic scope, but it would beg the question, why are two cables necessary for this? And also, since the cables enter the far end of the scope, where is the image gathering part of the scope? Is it in the front of the foregrip, and the image is transmitted via these cables to the scope on top? Or is the object on top not even a scope at all? This weapon can be upgraded with a recycling chip that modifies the appearance and doubles the ammo capacity. This upgrade adds even more cables to the scope-like object on top, which may indicate that it is where the microfusion cell that powers the rifle is located. If this is the case, it raises an important question regarding how a user could effectively hit a target at long ranges without any sort of scope or magnification devices. This gun is mentioned in Future Weapons Today magazine as being used by a sniper during the Sino-American War in Nanjing, China. The L-30 Gatling Laser was produced by Heckler & Koch, which apparently got in on the laser weapon development prior to the Great War. It was only a prototype, and although it could fire more rounds before overheating due to multiple barrels, it still could only shoot in bursts. It was powered by microfusion cells, and is closest in appearance to the General Electric M134 minigun. It is made to be held by an individual, most likely wearing power armor due to the immense weight, has ribbed barrels for cooling, and what looks like Nerf darts sitting in the barrel, but are just the focusing components of the laser. Probably. Now notice the name of the weapon is the Gatling Laser, while the gun it most closely resembles is a minigun. Let's talk a bit about these definitions. A Gatling gun was the original multi-barrel rotary gun and was hand-cranked and gravity-fed. Although such a gun can only ever be referred to as a Gatling gun, colloquially, it is okay to refer to any multi-barrel rotary gun as a Gatling gun, so it applies just fine to the Gatling Laser. A minigun, on the other hand, was invented by General Electric in the 1960s, when they scaled down the M61 Vulcan cannon, which was designed for aircraft, to something smaller that could be used in a helicopter. The minigun used a smaller round, hence the mini part of the name, but used an electric motor to drive the gun and achieve staggering rates of fire up to 6,000 rounds per minute. Another type of gun that can be easily confused with Gatling and miniguns is the chain gun. This type of gun has an externally powered action and drive system, as opposed to many firearms that cycle the action and reload via the expanding gases from shooting or the recoil of the shot. Hence, these guns are typically much larger and fire larger ammunition and are typically mounted on vehicles or aircraft. The Solar Scorcher is a unique weapon that, as the name suggests, is powered by the sun, or I guess really any source of bright light. Rather than deriving power from microfusion cells, it is described as charging via photoelectric cells. Looking at the design, intuitively I would say that the photoelectric cells are on the top of the gun, since that seems to be the area that would have the most direct sunlight. The design is not reminiscent of any firearm like the previous entries and is very sci-fi looking. It vaguely resembles some futuristic 80s toy guns like this one. Once again, we have a large handguard instead of a trigger guard, some lights that may indicate charge levels, and a very peculiar spherical butt that looks like it plays an important role in either storing energy or as part of the laser system itself. In-game, this gun cannot recharge at night or in caves, which, makes sense, and has unlimited ammo as long as you can charge it. Originally, this weapon was to be found at the Environmental Protection Agency, which unfortunately ended up being cut from the game. But if there was a government agency that would have a solar-powered laser gun, it would definitely be the EPA. The phaser is a cut laser pistol that would have been obtained at the Federation crash site in Fallout 2. It is a one-for-one representation of the phaser used in Star Trek, as the entire special encounter is an Easter egg for Star Trek fans. It would have been a good deal stronger than the Watts 1000 laser pistol as well. The AEP-7 is a laser pistol that is found in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, and replaced a previous version called the AEP-5 that is never shown in the game, but was notorious for overheating. It made significant improvements over its predecessor, including a redesigned focusing crystal pattern, an improved photonic focusing chamber, along with a selectable laser focus, wavelength, pulse energy, and fire rate. This all came in a lighter and smaller package with the intent to replace the N99 10mm pistol as the standard issue sidearm. The pistol itself bears no resemblance to any real firearm, and once again does not have a trigger guard, but opts for the mother of all handguards. If you have played the games much or watched any of my videos, then you know of the heavy influence 50s sci-fi has had on the series. This laser breaks with the most common 50s and 60s designs, with its blocky aesthetic. This gun is found to have many unique variants in Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3. The AER-9 laser rifle shares a lot in common with the AEP-7 laser pistol in terms of looks. This rifle is found in Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76. It was the most common laser rifle, although the more advanced AER-12 was being used by very select groups. Powered by energy cells, the lore states that the AE-R9 held up better over the years because the housing that held the focusing crystals in place was made of titanium instead of gold, which the later models had. This doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense though, as titanium oxidizes rather readily, whereas gold does not. So it makes sense that the gold housings would experience much less deterioration over time. Once again, there does not seem to be any overt resemblance to any weapon, real or fictional. Interestingly, there is a warning near the front of the gun that alerts users that this is a Class 6 laser, which may reference the international standard for measuring laser intensity, of which the most powerful industrial lasers of our time are at a 5. The Tri-Beam laser rifle of Fallout 3 in New Vegas is essentially just an AER-9 that fires 3 scattered laser beams as opposed to just one. Introduced in the Broken Steel DLC, this is a very powerful weapon in the late game. Players need to be very wary though, because the weapon has an effect that makes it deal 40 more damage per beam to the player character only. While obviously this was an effort to balance maxed out characters, I think it's funny to imagine these particular guns having some sort of vendetta against the Lone Wanderer and doing extra damage. This gun also cannot ignite gas in the air like all the other laser guns, which is likely just an oversight on the developer's part. The UB Fried 3000 is a Gatling laser with an unusually ironic name, even for the US government standards, that is found in New Vegas and Fallout 3. This gun has several advantages over the H&K Gatling laser we covered previously. This model was able to achieve full auto and came with a large battery pack that was carried on the wearer's back. This weapon is actually not a true Gatling type, as the barrels themselves don't rotate. Rather, lasers exit the weapon in a generally circular pattern, giving the same impression as a system with rotating barrels. This gun does not have to spool, like normal Gatling guns and miniguns, making it get into the action quicker. Once again, I could not find any sort of inspiration for the design, although it again shares the blocky type of design philosophy that the other laser weapons share in Fallout 3. Looking at the weapon, it appears to have a small display screen that would perhaps display important information relating to power and heat levels, and whatever else important information may be relevant to the user. The Lightning Gun is a cut gun from Fallout 3 that was to be very unique. Visually, it resembles the AER-9, although perhaps it would have looked a bit different if the gun was actually implemented in-game. The way the gun functions is unique, in that it fires 2 beams. The first hits the target and through some unexplained mechanism, generates combustible gas around the target. The second beam would ignite the gas, causing an explosion right at the target, thereby dealing some laser damage along with explosion damage. The mechanism by which an explosive gas would be generated by a laser is rather elusive, but I can only guess that the energy from the first beam was meant to scatter part of the target into a cloud that could more easily ignite. Perhaps some sort of reaction from the first laser causes a chemical reaction that releases various flammable gases from the target. Whatever the explanation is, it would have made for a very interesting gun that I would have loved to play with. The gun can only be accessed via console commands, and the name Lightning Gun does not seem to be a great description of this weapon because there is no lightning or really any electricity. The Laser RCW, which stands for Rapid Capacitor Weapon, is a mid to late game laser weapon with a very distinct firing method and look. The weapon was made as a precursor to the Gatling lasers, where they were experimenting with rapid-fire laser weapons. The operation method is laid out quite well and is pretty interesting. The part that appears to be a drum magazine is actually a series of 6 capacitors with an electron charge pack in the center. As the gun fires, the capacitors are rotated, each firing in succession. After they have been expended, they are charged again by the electron charge pack while they rotate completely back to the firing position, by which time they have a full electrical charge and can fire again. This means though that this gun must use the electron charge pack ammunition type, which is not as common in the game. and the rapid and near-continuous fire through a single barrel causes it to degrade more quickly than the average laser rifle. The multi-capacitor design is in contrast to the single capacitor design of most other laser weapons and enables its high rate of fire. The aesthetic inspiration is easily recognizable as the Thompson submachine gun or Tommy gun, even preserving its large drum magazine. It differs, however, with some wiring from the drum to the receiver, which no doubt powers the laser shot, and a tactical rail on top that would be used for sights. It also has what looks a bit like a chamber for a gas-operated action. Usually these chambers have a piston that is married to the bolt carrier, although not all the time. Expanding gases from the bullet will travel through a small opening into the chamber and push the bolt carrier back, causing the action to cycle, eject the spent casing, and load the next round. In the case of a laser, perhaps the operation dictated that some mechanical part of the action needed to be reset when fired, similar to the action of a firearm, and the heat from the laser would cause gas to expand and the firing mechanisms to cycle. Or perhaps this is something else entirely, as the original Thompson lacked any sort of gas return system. There's also a modified muzzle that may be where some focusing lenses are housed to concentrate the laser beam. Some interesting tidbits about this gun are that it was inspired by a concept in Van Buren, Black Isle's ill-fated Fallout 3. It copied the firing mechanism of the laser array gun, which is meant to provide a continuous or near-continuous laser beam and was shown in the tech demo. At different points in New Vegas' development, the gun was named the Laser PDW for personal defense weapon and Laser CBW, continuous beam weapon. This is most obvious in most of the internal assets being labeled as PDW rather than RCW. Originally it was meant to fire one solid beam, but complications with making that work within the engine caused the development team to abandon the idea and switch to a high rate of fire automatic design that we see in the game. Found only in New Vegas, the recharger pistol is unique in that it will generate its own ammunition over time. Technically, the ammo is called a microfusion breeder and will cause the gun to recharge one shot per second. Due to this, the damage is relatively low, although it can be snuck into no weapon areas in the game with sufficient sneak skill. Although I was not able to identify any particular example, this gun takes its looks from the 50s and 60s sci-fi ray guns, with tubes, wires, fins, and a flared muzzle in a style that is very reminiscent of old ray guns. Perhaps many of you grew up with a ray gun or space gun toy that had some commonalities with the recharger pistol. It also seems to have been pretty brightly colored, with remnants of bright paint on many parts of the gun, which again speaks to its ray gun inspiration. Similar to the recharger pistol is the recharger rifle, although for some reason the recharger rifle is inferior to the pistol. While it seems like more space afforded by the longer design could accommodate more advanced tech, the pistol outclasses the rifle. Regardless, it uses the same microfusion breeder ammo, and again, while I can't find a specific example that inspired its looks, it pulls heavily from the ray gun designs of the 50s. The MF Hyper Breeder Alpha is an advanced form of the recharger pistol that was introduced in the Gunrunner arsenal. It bears a strong resemblance to the recharger pistol, but has different, mostly darker colors and some extra wires that lead to the muzzle area. This pistol has an increased damage and, most importantly, reduces the recharge time from a shot per second to a shot every 0.3 seconds. This makes the gun much more viable, particularly when you sneak into places that confiscate your weapons. The extra power and rate of fire comes at the cost of having only half the total ammo capacity of the recharger pistol, though. This gun also uses the microfusion breeder ammunition like all the other rechargers. This ammo is really interesting, as it cannot be taken out of the gun and is therefore essentially a permanent part of the weapon. It is interesting to think about what the mechanics are for this, as the name is reminiscent of fission breeder reactors, which are fission reactor types that cause more fissile material than is consumed. This is usually accomplished by adding various radioactive isotopes of thorium or uranium around the fuel, which would be bombarded with neutrons and turned into fissile forms of uranium or plutonium given enough time. Although microfusion cells are still a small puzzle to me in how they operate, It seems that however they are able to utilize fusion, this process generates power with time. It is important to note, however, that breeder reactors are not some sort of unlimited energy, and likewise these microfusion breeder cores would likely permanently run out of energy at some point. Given how some of these recharger weapons can be found abandoned in some places, we may consider the possibility that they can maintain their charge for over 200 years, since this is the time between the Great War and when New Vegas takes place. Now we've come to the end of the first part on the laser weapons of Fallout. If your favorite laser weapon did not make it in this video, don't panic and don't write me an angry comment, since it is likely going to feature in my next video on laser weapons. Like always, if you have any interesting information, corrections, or something that I totally missed when analyzing these weapons, please leave a comment. I'm a firm believer that none of us are as smart as all of us, and all of us are as dumb as some of us. Or something like that. Thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.